Paul Butler is an author, a spiritual guide, and speaker on divine consciousness, trauma release, and personal mastery. With a bold, raw, and deeply compassionate approach, I love that. He helps people peel back the layers of conditioning and reconnect to their spiritual, their true self. I think I add the spiritual part to it, their true self. Not through force, but through awareness. So thank you so much for being here, Bill. I appreciate you so much. I am going to start, in every conversation, you talk about awareness being the starting point for everything.
I
Why
do.
do most people miss it?
Because we come into this world and we get conformed to the outside world, and I don't know, we forget that we're animated by God. And if we're, in my opinion, okay, and if we're animated by God, then we have the attributes of God. But when we come into this world, uh, we get conformed to the world, and we
Mhm.
pick up. We all belong to tribes in this world, okay? Whether you start off in like a family tribe, maybe you have a religious tribe, maybe you have a cultural or ethic tribe, you might have a social tribe, you might have a national political type of tribe, okay? And all those tribes teach us things, but a lot of those things that we learn are not true. And we slowly, from a child, we get conformed and we think these rules are true. And then when you start to step away from the tribe, then that's really uncomfortable because you no longer have that cohesiveness with this group of people. So it's a lot easier to stay conformed to the tribe and not ask questions. Okay. And therefore, we don't recognize the greatness inside of us. And so I think that people just need to become aware that they need to become aware. And that's the best that I can tell you. It's like it's like putting a frog in a pot of water, and it's cold water, right? And then
Yeah.
you slowly heat it up until the frog's boiling. They never become aware of what's going on because it seems so natural, almost insidious in a way.
I'm going to relate that to something that I just experienced, which has nothing to do with seasons, nothing to do, but it has pretty much everything to do with awareness at a very practical level, which is that I have internet, and one day the internet goes off. And this was 2 weeks ago. I'm like, I go outside, people are working on the internet. I'm like, okay, it's gonna be, a few hours, whatever. Well, the internet company, without telling us, just decided to remove the contract that we had, and they basically sold their accounts to another company. So now our internet goes up in price, and we spent about a week without internet. They never really gave us a reason, and never really gave us a solution. It was more of like a community effort to figure out what was happening because it was a whole neighborhood. And in that moment, I became aware by an abrupt event. And it made me really question a lot of things that in the past I have questioned, I have become aware, but you just kind of put on the side. And it just made me realize I started questioning, okay, we are a democracy. But within a democracy, there is so many other forms of government, like capitalism or socialism, and the reality is that we have little bit of pieces of all that stuff. So our form of government is so unique. So when you're talking about being part of different groups and different tribes, I feel like it's like we are part of all of them, but at the same part we create our own. And it's a combination of all those choices and decisions that we make over time. So this is extremely practical, but it was a moment that awakened me. It's like I watched the frog in the cold water that slowly heat up, and I realize I become complacent. But something happened that made me question what is going on here. Like, is this fair? And the list goes on and on. So I completely relate. And when it comes to awareness, I have experienced that in many different levels. But the one that most relate to this podcast is as the seasons come and go.
Yes.
It truly awakened me. And it awakened me by, we can call this trauma. So I want to get your opinion on this because trauma can be seen from many different angles. For me, it's not the only trauma that I have, but experiencing the seasons at a negative level, having seasonal affective disorder, having the winter blues, just feeling uncomfortable and then knowing why until I realized, wow, it's the seasons. So how trauma can be the catalyzer for awareness, I think is one of those great services we can give to the audience because I feel that that's often where we find it in our lowest points.
Yes. I mean, I would completely agree with that. I mean, a lot of times, like, I had picked up some weight and I looked at why I was picking up weight. And it wasn't until I had the awareness, I'm like, Bill, you need to change your diet a little bit. Let's eat a little few more vegetables, few more fresh fruits, and then the weight started coming off. And it's not until you have some friction, okay, some trauma, something that caused some pain, okay. I tell people all the time, if somebody says to you something to you, and then you have a gut reaction to it, most of the time, maybe all the time, there's something in you that you're not comfortable with, okay.
Hmm.
Because if somebody came up to me and said, at this point in time, said, "Oh, Bill Powler, you're the stupidest, whatever, mother, whatever," it wouldn't bother me at all. Okay. Now, if you'd have said that to me 40 years ago, I probably would have hit the guy in the face, right? So, anytime we have pain, it has the potential to drive awareness if you're paying attention. And that's the same thing with trauma. Okay. It's the same thing when you talk about the seasons. This summer, I live in Alabama, super hot. The heat in the summer and the intensity of the sun overwhelms me. As soon as we move into fall, my mood changes.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm literally, started to go up north a little bit during the heat of the summer. Um,
Yeah,
so
I have noticed. We often give examples, and I often use the winter because it's more relatable to the people in the northern hemisphere. But with your
sure,
seasonal affective disorders, what you're describing is the actual summer. Like people in Phoenix experience an even. It is an even. It is 120 degrees, and you spend most of your time inside, indoors, and you don't. So the point being is like these are not I mean, these are unique situations based on where you live, based on who you are, but the effect of at an universal level, it's like the environment has an effect in us. We can put a few examples that are personal and they're going to vary, but the main thing is the environment affect us. So I have a question, environmental triggers. So how do you see the environment, the light, the weather, nature, shaping our biology and shaping our awareness or consciousness in ways that we don't think aloud? Perhaps we feel them, but we act in a response because we are not aware. So I want to achieve, and I basically go deeper in what you already mentioning, being the summer in the way that you feel. But why most people miss that as well? Is like the environment is important. The environment changes, light, weather, nature. It shapes who we are. It shapes how we think, how we feel, and how we act.
absolutely,
How can we use that as a tool for awareness, to grow our awareness?
grow our awareness. I haven't thought about that, Ruben. How can we use that? Well, I mean, in one way, when you realize all the seasonal cycles, all the environment, water, clouds, sunshine, dirt, air, everything, nature, trees. I mean, if you look at it closely with awareness, it's all alive. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're alive inside of it. So we're almost like little cells, little
Mm-hmm.
living cells in this huge, biosphere. Okay. And and not only just in the biosphere, but my consciousness and your consciousness, we both carry energy, and that energy feeds off of each other, right? So if we're watching the news and it's all this chaotic, I'm going to say there's a lot of stupid stuff going on out there, okay? All this chaotic, stupid stuff, it makes us anxious, right? So, but the nature is just so beautiful. That's the place to calm. So,
Mm-hmm.
with awareness, you can realize that we're not supposed to be sitting in our cubicles under fluorescent lights 8 or 10 hours a day, and then getting in our enclosed cars with our windows up and the air conditioning, and then driving to our homes that are behind gates and locks. And then we go home and we eat a little processed food or food that's not even processed, just, things that aren't fresh or whatever. And, and then we sit down after we've been sitting all day and then we flip on the TV and watch the chaos on the TV. And it's absurd. And so I think that if you go back to, I don't know what the proper term is now, Native Americans, but you go back to people that live close to the ground, okay? They
Mm,
live outside in tents or huts or, not these big, beautiful palatial structures with air conditioning that we have now. And those people were aware. They're aware of the movement of nature. They're aware of the movement of the sun. They realize that when the days start to get longer, that's planting season, right? And
hmm.
the days get shorter, then we know we're into harvest and we're storing our food for winter, right?
I
Um,
agree.
and so that awareness of this uh, this seasonal movement of this world of this biosphere is we take it for granted. But when you start stepping outside with awareness, you go, wow, this is incredible. This is powerful. This was built with intelligence, right?
I love the way you got to that point, the way you develop it, because clearly I took you off balance, and clearly you were able to articulate from the beginning till the end, and it just sounds like a chapter of my book, right? It's like not that to diminish who we are, but we are a small portion of a larger organism. And I like to think that we're not disconnected from it. I like to think that that separateness is just an illusion that we are, our inner and our outer worlds are here to guide us. So you go back to Native Americans, and I think that's when we have lost most of it. Is that when that went away because the wisdom of how to live in harmony with nature was a mode of survival. Like you
Exactly.
say, living on the ground, not not with a basement below us, perhaps. Being in contact. Lately, I've been embracing grounding more and more and more and more. And this all has seasonal responses because think about it. In the winter, we use or choose more. We don't go outside as much. At least the people that experience deep
Sure.
winters. Grounding goes off the ground. We live in a house. I don't like calling it synthetic, but we are not in contact to the ground. So that has an effect in us. Everything that we're touching here, when it comes down to the seasons, has an effect, and we have been separated from it. It's this time. It's not on purpose, but it's just where we are now. There are ways though that we can embrace that. And I don't like to think that it's just as an edge to be the best version of ourselves, but it comes down to it. Like we are better when we are together, where we are aligned in nature. And understanding how having awareness of that seasonal cycle, I find to be the best way back into it. So I want to make this personal because I do remember in our previous conversation that you mentioned that most of your spiritual breakthroughs, for some reason, you weren't able to connect it back then happening in August. So this is important to recognize. The reason I want to go here is number one, making it personal, but number two, there is a cyclicality to things. We're coming out of a season, entering into a season, and you realize over the years, around this time of the year, this happens. The reason I want to go there is number one, I'm extremely interested to see what has come out since last we spoke, if you have seen and pick up a pattern. But how do you start noticing that pattern? Because I think that's what most people miss is the moment to reflect and to start putting the dots together. I think that's the beginning of awareness at a sustainable level. Perhaps not that moment of it changed my life, but as we live, we grow, we learn. I think it starts by being able to put those dots together. And when you mention that, I'm like extremely, I want to bring that to the audience, but because I think it's great insight.
Uh, I would say two things. If people want to become aware, the first thing is they ought to take their shoes off and go walk around in the grass. I mean, seriously, that there's a grounding thing that happens. Whether you're sitting on the ground, whether you're walking barefoot on the ground, uh, uh, there's energy, and there's lots of scientific studies about it. And I don't know them off the top of my head, but I've read some of them. And there's things that pass through the ground energetically into our bodies. And when you take your shoes off and you get out of your car and you get off the concrete and you start walking around in the grass, it literally changes your perception. Okay. I go to the beach at least a couple times a year to a very secluded beach in Florida. It's a national park. And I go sit out by the ocean side probably 2 or 3 days in a row from almost morning until night. Sometimes I'll go early in the morning and leave about halfway during the day, and sometimes I'll go later in the day and stay through sunset. And there, I mean, I could talk a lot about water too.
Mhm.
Maybe I will,
Yes.
but um, being on the beach, if you're not just sitting there drinking beer and listening to the radio, okay, I go to the beach with a backpack that has got a bottle of water, big bottle of water in it, a couple pieces of fruit, and a sheet and a towel and my frisbee, and that's it, okay. And I sit on this secluded piece of beach for 4, 5, 6, 8 hours, and there's so many elements going on at the beach. You've got the sun beating down on you, okay? And then sometimes the clouds come along, feels a little cooler. You've got the wind, okay? You've got the ocean, and you've got the waves and the noise of the wind and the noise of the ocean. And waves, if you stop and listen to waves, waves that break further out sound different than waves that break on the shoreline. So you've got these different sounds. Then you put the animals, the birds and the crabs, and then you walk in the ocean and you feel the temperature of the water while you've got the sun beating down, like your bottom part's cool when you're halfway in the water and your top part's hot, and then you go completely in the water and you don't have gravity anymore, okay, and you completely surrounded by water, and water has got consciousness, and most people don't realize this, but the ocean will literally pull bad energy out of you and clean it and distribute it into the ocean. And you think about that all water in the whole planet is connected. It's
Mhm.
all connected. Every drop of it is connected. That's amazing. Okay.
Mm.
And so you've got this beautiful consciousness around you. So, um, so awareness and the earth, uh, go out and just walk around the grass, sit. And if you sit somewhere in just a little bit of nature and you're quiet for 5, 10 minutes, and the animals don't feel like you're a threat, okay?
Mhm.
You're not
Yeah, they come to you.
at them or screaming or anything. You're just sitting there. All the animals start coming out. I've had birds come right up to me. I've had all type of animals come right up to me. Okay, um, so get out in nature. That's my first thing about awareness. My second thing about awareness is you got to be quiet. You've got to have quiet time for yourself every day, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But if you don't sit in the silence for 15 minutes every day, it's really hard to get aware. And I mean, and I'm not going to preach a bunch of Jesus, although I do love Jesus, but I love all religions. Uh, but if you look at all the prophets, you look at Jesus, you look at Buddha, I could name a bunch of other ones if I could think of them, and even just spiritual people, they all have large chunks of silence. Okay. And
Mm.
when you have enough silence, the noise of the world, and nature is not really noise, nature's like harmony. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we can talk about sound and nature. I love this time of the year because the circadians are on, and
Oh,
I know that they're rhythmic. I know I sync with them, and I absolutely love this time of the year because of that.
I didn't know that you did that, but I was out and the cicadas were in the park the other night, and they were so loud it was almost deafening. And I've stood there before, and I know you've experienced this. They start in one tree real slow and it keeps getting up to a crescendo. And as that crescendo
Mhm.
starts to come down, then this tree starts. I went to the park one night and picked a pattern of like eight
Mm.
trees that had cicadas in them, and they were all pattering together over and over and over
Mm.
again, the same pattern.
Yeah.
I was amazed. Um,
Whew. Yeah. I mean, I wanna touch on so many points. I mean, just talking about circadians makes me light up because I don't think most people understand that the circadians are rhythmic and the sound is healing. And I mean, you know, you're talking about consciousness in the ocean, and the next thing you know, you identify yourself, you love Jesus. And I want to really explain that. Like, how come there's consciousness in the universe? It's not just humans that can be conscious, but also nature itself. I want to leave that there for us to dive into because I think that it talks to going back to we as humans. Surely we are created in the image of God, but God lives everywhere. It's not just in humans. Like God has created the whole universe, and
Yeah.
He's everywhere. So that this connection that we are above, or we're different, or like I feel like that is where a lot of that awareness goes away. When you hear that rhythmic circadia going on and what you said, the pattern, when you're able to take the time to look into those patterns, you see how much power is in them. And when you open to that and you breathe through it, it heals you. Now, I'm from Venezuela, so I grew up by the ocean. Now I live in the Midwest, so I'm halfway separated through it. I live in a four-state landlocked state now. It's the only one, Nebraska, and I live as far as away as I can from coast to coast. I'm in the middle of the U.S. and I do miss the beach because it's not just fun. I don't, sometimes we'll bring our music and have fun and so on, but just being on the ocean, I used to surf, and half of it is just sitting on the water, on the waves, and that's it.
Oh yeah.
And I wanted to bring to our attention that those 15 minutes are great, but what I have done, this is just to share with the listeners to connect back to nature, is that I do fasting and I do solar retreatment 4 times a year. So in the summer, I like to basically seclude my environment. Now, going back to the story on the beach, what you did was that you described a sensory overload. You describe senses from sound that change back and forward from the gravity itself, from temperature. Like you were immersed in your senses, which that I believe is what our body gives us from a worldly perspective, is the access to those sensory experiences. And I like to remove them in the summer, so I enclosure myself. And that just kind of pulls me into getting closer to God in a different way, more intimate. And it basically kind of cleanses my senses to then appreciate more what's happening outside. Because in the summer is when we get a lot of sensory input. Not that there is no more or less during other seasons, but we're somehow overloaded.
Right.
And then in the spring and fall, I like to go camping. I would go to the beach, but I don't have a beach. So I
Right.
go camping and I fast for 48 hours to connect to the seasonal transition line. In the spring and the fall is when we're switching from that yang energy to yin. Basically, the expansion, the light growing, it starts to become more evident that change starts to gradually go into a more noticeable change. We start feeling that energy. And nature itself changes dramatically during that time. Bulbs start opening up in the spring, and then vice versa. In the fall, leaves start shedding, trees start changing colors. So what I like to do is to time it, is to try to arrive. I check the weather, and I know where we are cyclically, where we're heading, and I try to time it so that I arrive perhaps in the winter and I leave in the spring. And I'm talking about a 2 day difference. And it most likely is through a storm or something, and I'm just in my tent. And then
Uh-huh.
the fall is the same during that fall storm,
Hmm.
so that I arrive in summer, it's a little hot and everything. And 2 days later, there's already trees that are perhaps brown.
Oh, cool.
And then you start seeing the leaves to connect to that transition. I find it very beneficial from a it's like fear, sometimes that is triggered through these changes. And I find that calls me, that makes me connect. And I'm like, okay, now I'm in rhythm for what is to come for the next 6 months. So I want to share that to the audience, that on top of those 10, 15 minutes that we get to nature every day, we can also be intentional about doing that perhaps 4 times a year. And now going back to a question that came into my heart is that, how come there is consciousness in the ocean? If you can please expand on that, because I think that if you expand on that, that means that consciousness is everywhere. So I want to know your perspective on that.
I've got some really clear thoughts on this. And this paper, I write a weekly story. It takes me about a minimum 4 to 5 hours. It usually takes me 6 to 7 hours, and it's a 10-minute, 1,200 word story. Usually, try to keep it under 1,200 words. And I literally just talked about the title of my story last week was "Three Souls Explain How to Heal in the Unfolding." Okay, and it was about a French mystic, Pierre Desjardins, and Carolyn Misk, who's a spiritual writer, and Edgar Casey, who they call the sleeping prophet. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
Yeah, and he was like in the 1920s, 30s. He would lay down and access the, I'm going to call it universal consciousness. And people would come to him and they would want to be healed of something, and he would access the other side, and then he would tell them what they needed to do to heal. And he would tell them about relationships they have in this world that they had in past lives. But he had over 14,000 readings, and they're all documented. So it's fascinating. But I took these three people and put their theologies together, which is all very similar. And that is that I've defined God, and you can't define God, okay? And we're just using words, so we're just doing the best we can, okay? But my primary adjective or noun or whatever that I use to describe God is consciousness, okay? And if God is consciousness and he's created all this, then all of this has consciousness in it. And we go cut down a tree and think nothing of it, but that tree is alive, and trees communicate with each other, and those
Hmm.
leaves fall off, and mushrooms grow, and birds live, all this stuff. And you think about a tree, you walk up to a tree, that tree's got energy. It has it has witnessed sometimes hundreds of years of life. Crystals. I went to the gem show the other day. I bought some crystals. Crystals grow. They're alive. It's amazing. Uh, but anyway, so I believe that God is consciousness and this overarching consciousness, and that we actually think the Garden of Eden story, if you're familiar with it, where God, Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden. Um, that's really what happens when we come to this planet in bodies, is we're in God consciousness. Okay, we're in the perfect light where you don't really, what you experience is bliss. Okay, but we leave the consciousness and become individuated pieces of consciousness. Okay, so we can experience the universe in another way, and then that all our experiences feed back into universal consciousness. So when I die, I can go look at all my experiences that I had here and experiences in other lives. And with permission, I can look at your experiences. Okay. Just like you and I are sharing consciousness right now, right? We're sharing our bits of consciousness, and we are growing like a body, like cells all together. And so, uh, and God created water, and there's studies, and I wrote about it in my book. There's studies where Dr. Emoto from Japan took bottles of water and exposed them to different things, and it changes the cellular nature. Okay, so let's pretend that, well, not pretend, we know that each of us are about 60% water, give or take.
Hmm.
Okay, and we know that if you take a jar of water and say ugly things to it, it changes the cellular structure of that water, and it looks uglier as opposed to pure water that you say love to. So if I say to Ruben, I say, "Oh, dude, I love you. You're so awesome." Okay, that changes the consciousness, that changes your water. Okay, at the same time, if I'm raising you as a child and I've got problems and I'm whipping you all the time and telling you you're a stupid little shit, okay, that changes your consciousness. And so all these things, I mean, words are vibration, they're air vibrations, okay?
Hmm.
Changing air, just like the cicadas are changing air
Hmm.
when they go. So it's all consciousness. We're enclosed in these bodies on this planet for what we call a lifetime, but we're eternal souls, and all of us are connected. And Desjardins believes, and I've believed this before I even read his stuff, is that God is allowing his consciousness to flow. And I say his, hers, its, okay? There's God created male and female, right? So God has male and female inside of
Yeah.
it. Okay?
I want to touch on the water and how we perceive vibration and how it changes. Like, we feel it. So the reason because I want to touch on that is because I believe that the most powerful explanation of why the seasons matter is because the seasons are a vibration. At a big picture, the seasons are a vibration, and we feel that change when thousands and thousands and thousands of trees are shredding their leaves and the grass stops growing. All that energy is going underground. don't we feel that? Of course we do.
Yes.
They're saying that in the spring, when all those trees are flowering and all the energy is just erupting from underground, literally, like that vibration is just pulling upwards. And when you see the actual electromagnetic frequency of the air, there are circles, right?
Yeah.
So as we're experiencing that, we feel it as well. So we are primarily water, and we are moldable by that vibration. We feel it, and it changes us the same way that it will change us if we're in an environment that is negative or positive. We feel that change in the environment. I love how the yin yang expresses that, and
Yes.
what reminds me of the yin yang, which is a chapter in my book, is when you mentioned that God created man and woman, and in order
Yep.
for him to create it, he has to have that in himself. You can't have one without the other. And perhaps, when you're looking at the yin yang, you realize that is just what we experience throughout our lives, the day and the night. You can't have one without the other. Becoming aware and becoming unaware. You have to be unaware to be able to be aware. You
Right.
know, so like it can play at any level, and I just find it that is so powerful to have that, to be open, to understand that the fact that we experience one is because the other also exists. And I find that when it comes down to the seasons, like it is one thing to be aware and to recognize that one season affects you negatively, perhaps. Like, I perhaps don't like it as much,
Right.
um, because that gives you awareness to change it, but also recognizing that the reason that you're able to experience the one that you like is because this other one exists. And it's not that it's just different. And
Yep.
perhaps your approach is what can shift that experience that you have of that season. Also, your awareness of how are you talking to that season, how you're talking to yourself in that season. But it all comes from accepting it. So I wanna talk about surrendering,
Okay.
that's the process that I like to go through every time that I perceive resistance in my life, every time that some trauma, in different shapes kind of arises, and I feel that resistance, that separation, like, oh, something's wrong, and perhaps I don't know yet. I like to engage in a process, and I have a few steps to follow, but it pretty much goes down to trying to understand and like sit there, like breathe and experience it for what it is, and trying to understand what's happening, and then accepting it, accepting, then surrender to it. And you know what? I choose to surrender to it, and then just experiencing it. We know biases, we
Yes.
know predispositions, which might be pretty much impossible. I'm just going to be honest, but like to a degree, like don't have the right to judge it, perhaps. Like remove that, surrender that quote unquote right, and experience that for what it is, hopefully in unity at that point, in co-creation. So I know that when it comes down to awareness, that has to be something that has dramatically helped you shape your belief system. And I want to know what your process about surrendering, accepting, and experiencing is.
Um, okay. Can you hold that question for 1 second? Will you
Yeah,
remember?
100%.
Because I want to jump back for just 1 second when you're talking about the yin and the yang. Okay. Can you
There
see
we go.
that?
Yeah,
What I love about the yin and the yang is that there's a spot of darkness in the light and there's a spot of light in the darkness. That is the beauty. I mean, it's the darkness and the light combined, but they have a piece of each other inside of it. And there's magic there. There's a thought process there.
is that your book, bro?
Yeah, that's my book. That's in my book. My book, yeah, that's a book. What's that chapter on? I've got a bunch of I got a chapter on symbols, because symbols are important. But yes, this is my book, Awakening to Ourselves. So,
What says
uh,
the better, the art of
uh,
building,
the art of building a spiritually aware life.
the art of building a spiritually aware mind. We can hold on to the other question. I want to know more about your book. I want to know. You mentioned you have symbols. What is in it? What is in your book?
Um, because symbols are all around us. Every everything we do in this world is symbols. Okay, when we're taught to make sounds, they're basically symbols, and then we write them. I mean, if you look at a sheet of paper and you look at the words, okay, we've learned all those letters, and then we put them together as words, and then we have a an idea of what those words mean. That's all symbols. Math is symbols. I mean, if this whole thing is symbols, that's why it's in there because people don't understand. Like if you look at a flag is a symbol. If you look at a emblem on a car, like a BMW, I wrote about that in my book. That's black and white, black and blue, black and white and blue uh, circle with the quarter segments in it. Uh, that's a propeller because BMW started, but it's also round is solidity. Okay, but that shows movement, and it also shows like movement as part of adventure, and that's kind of all BMW symbol. So there's symbols around us everywhere. We don't even think about it, and it's important to and so many religious symbols. Okay, the snake, whatever it's called, the figure eight. Okay, which is the infinity signal, but is also a snake is the power, your kundalini power, your
Yeah.
energy that rises up through your body. But okay, I mean, we can talk about my book sometime. Go back to your question.
Well, I want to add to the symbols. The seasonal movement symbol is your fingerprint in a spiral like context. So, like here I have a
Oh, really?
spiral, and like represents the continual expansion of the universe, which we're accelerating and still expanding. But the fingerprint combined to that, which your fingerprint, you already pretty much have that
Yeah, we
that
have this.
that uh,
Yeah, I'm looking.
that symbol, but just more predominantly is just your uniqueness. Your own unique biological fingerprint, and you represent it as a being that is meant to expand you know so or at least here to expand the world around you, to add to it. So I just wanted to bring that up, but
That's
I
beautiful.
really yeah, that was the thought behind it. I want to know about your book, and my question was a good question about your book. What you talk about what is in your book, what do you cover? Feel free to go through the meaning behind it, like what is the one thing somebody can get out of reading your book? Like, I just want to know what was in your heart and what was put into it, because I know that you read a lot, but that specific book has a one goal. I want to know what it is.
The one goal was that I spent the better part of over 30 years really just thinking about spiritual stuff. And finally, and it was really hard. And I had some advisors, and I've been to I've been to wisdom school, I've been to Nine Gates Mystery School, I've studied and I've sat in silence. And it took me a long time to become as aware as I felt like I needed to be. And I know a lot of people, and we have a lot of terms in the spiritual world that I don't necessarily like, whether you're enlightened or not. We're all enlightened, but becoming aware that we're enlightened, because enlightened means you're full of light, right? We're all full of light, okay? So it's just a matter of whether you become aware that you're full of light. And that's all enlightenment is. And it's not like I'm more enlightened than you are, or you're more enlightened than me. It's just a matter of awareness of the power that's inside of you. But anyway, it just seems so difficult to get there. It's a little bit easier, I think, with the internet and a lot of the social media stuff out there. At the same time, I think it's a little more confusing. But Spirit told me to write a book that took my experiences and all my basic thought process and put it in one book to make it easier for people to become aware of the true power of God that lies inside of them. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Wow. And, that is of great service. Thank you so much for putting that time. And I want to make sure that you guys know that we're going to be putting that book link in the description below, so that you can go ahead and purchase it and read it and grow your awareness. I am going to buy a copy and I'm going to read it. So
Thank
we're
you.
going to be putting that link down below. Thank you so much, Bill. I did left that one question open, but quite honestly, the reason it hasn't been answered is just because it wasn't meant to be. I do wanna move on, because the episode is getting towards the final portion of it, and the way I am. I do want to hear from your perspective the power in the way I am. It is so powerful into creating a reality. So, what is your perspective on it, and why the world I am is so important?
Okay. I'm actually, we're going to do, I'm going to use my book for this because I've got a chapter on the power of I am. Okay. So, um, Sarah, we're just going to do this. Okay. So I want you to think about the word I am And I want you, as you're thinking about it, I want you to recognize the godness in you. Okay, so we're just going to take a second and just think of the word I am. I am. And as you say, I am, you're thinking about recognizing the God that's in you, the goodness, the godness, the goddess that's in you. And then I want you to take that same word, I am, and I want you to claim that godness. Not only do you recognize it, but you claim it as your power. Okay. And then the third thing is um, claiming that godness in the present moment, right now. Right now, I recognize and claim that I'm God because I'm a part of God. So, and when you recognize that, if you can recognize the I am that animates you, the word soul comes from the word anime, which means to animate. So, when you can recognize that you are God, okay, because you are part of God, we're all part of God, then with awareness, you just take off all these roles, all these stupid things we think we believe, and then on a daily basis, you walk around in peace and in your power.
Beautiful. I was thinking about blessed, powerful, and the list just goes on and on. I'm not going to go into detail, but thank you so much for this gift. I appreciate the 4 minute that just makes me feel great. I do have, when it comes down to I am, this is a real question. We often buy our own BS. We often uh, become blind, and we often sometimes become very narrow. And I do have this way of using the word I am that I know it's extremely biased because of what I'm doing, like my what I'm trying to bring to the world. But I say I am seasonal. Like I know the power of I am, and I use that to in my book. And every opportunity that I get, I challenge the reader, the audience, to believe you are seasonal. You have always been, you will ever be, maybe you haven't realized. So I am seasonal is one of those I ams. But again, it's like I know there's more to it. I know it's not the most powerful I am statement that can be ever made in the universe, but I feel like I'm called to bring that into consciousness. You are seasonal, whether you realize it or not. It's time to become aware that you are seasonal, and then you have the opportunity to leverage that in a good way for your life. To experience life in a better way. So I just wanted to share that because I do believe that I am is so powerful, and that's like my unique little nudge to everybody that is listening right now.
I mean, I hear what you say, and I completely agree. And I think that that's beautiful because we are seasonal. We are seasonal. I mean, sometimes we're happy and we're in our spring and we're blooming, and sometimes, we're in the winter and we're dying. And that is the cycle of the spirit, you know? So I think it's a beautiful recognition, and thank you.
You're welcome. I do acknowledge the word. We're talking symbols earlier. Practical. Is part of your book's description, and the word practical. I think that can be achieved through acknowledging that we're seasonal. Like there's a lot of practicality that comes into. But I wanted to ask you within your book, what makes it practical? I know that we already hear your objective. We're writing it to help us arrive there a lot faster than you did. A lot of times that is just about speed and precision to get to the right place. But being practical sometimes gets diluted in the philosophy and in the depth of concepts that we have talked so much in this episode and that you talk in your book. And what is a very practical nudge that we can leave the audience with, because we have mentioned very powerful words, very powerful frameworks, very many moments of awareness. And if we are able to make it practical to conclude our episode, what are a few ways to do it? Because I know your book, practical is part of it, and I know that you have found ways. So this is the opportunity to share them.
Thank you. Um, we already talked about taking your shoes off and going out, walking around in nature and sitting in nature. That's very practical. Um, but here are the two things that I tell people all the time is that we are filled with love. Okay. But every time we make a decision, we have every decision we make is either toward love or against love. Okay. So every time you make a decision, whether it's putting a Coke in your mouth or putting a banana in your mouth, one of them is more loving than the other. Okay. How we treat people. We can choose to treat people with love, or we can choose not to treat people with love. Okay. Every decision we make has a love factor in it. Okay. And I do have to define that sometimes love is pull the sword off and cut the head off because that's in that's a way to love. You cannot, I don't think you should completely undiscipline your kids and just let them do whatever. At the same time, you don't need to squish them. Okay. So love can be very hard. It can be very forceful. It can also be very nurturing. But regardless, if your intention is to love with all your decisions, then that will change your life. Okay. Once your life changes, everybody else's life changes. The other thing that I always tell people, so I think that's practical. Every decision you make, choose love or not choose love, but just make sure you know what you're choosing. Okay.
Mhm.
And then I would obviously tell you to choose love a lot more, even if it's hard, because hard love is hard to do sometimes.
I agree.
So, second thing I would tell people is every time you have pain, I'm talking about physical pain, although sometimes it is physical pain, because I don't know, whatever happens to you gives you this gut reaction. You want to react. You have pain. You have to look inside yourself and see what false beliefs that you are carrying, because that's what pain does. If you cut yourself on the arm, okay, your body sends your brain a pain signal so that you know that you're cut so that you can tend to that, right? When we have pain, our emotional system is sending us a signal that there's something inside of us that we need to deal with. But lots of people just, I'm just going to drink some more. I'm going to go to the psychiatrist. They're going to give me some pills, whatever. Or I'm just going to comatose myself out in front of Netflix for 3 days. So anytime you have pain, if you look at that pain with awareness, you will figure out what false beliefs that you carry. And then with awareness, it's like you were talking about earlier, things float in. Depression can float in. But if you don't say, I am depressed, if you just watch the depression or the sadness, it will float away. The same
Mm.
thing with everything in our system that is a false belief. If you just stop and look at it with awareness, it will dissolve on its own.
Wow. I have to add a few things here because
Please.
this is extremely powerful. Number one, at that proud moment last night, I asked my son who you are, and he say loving, and I'm like, wow, like yeah, right before bed, just very briefly, we weren't too deep into it, but that just kind of talks about the kind of child that I have. It really came from his heart, and he even explained it. So number one, loving my child. I mean, I just wanted to share that. I'm so proud about that. Now, number two is when talking about, I mean, you start touching on the brain, you start touching on the pain, you start touching on all these things that you start triggering me. I want to share these. As I'm writing about it and as I study it from a seasonal perspective, oftentimes our body, that pain, and we can call it oddness. You feel off, you feel the actual pain. Okay, that's more visceral, that's more obvious. Any of those negative reactions that doesn't allow you to feel the best version of yourself, and you notice, wow, something's going on. If we train ourselves to see them as signals, there is just a signal. What is that signal? Now, our signals are just simply neurochemicals or hormones or brain sees a pattern, sees something in the environment, whether the environment is your own body that you actually caught yourself and you feel physical pain, whether the environment is, what is going on around you, whether it's social
Absolutely.
dynamics or whether it is, the weather, or whether it is your indoor space, your brain sends you a signal and says, something's not right. Sometimes it might be like something's absolutely allowed to kill you, and you feel that you don't even think about it. You jump, you run. That's a shot of cortisol.
Right.
Now, sometimes it comes in dopamine, serotonin, melatonin. And when it comes down to understanding our environment at a seasonal level, it's about how this environment send those signals. That's another work that I do, is to bring awareness of how that environment actually sends us a signal in the form of a neurochemical. It's that simple.
Exactly.
Now, becoming aware of that is the first step. I feel out what's going on around me that is making me feel that. Oftentimes, It's just the environment changing. You're sleeping less or you're sleeping later, and you should, like the lighting is changing where you are. The social dynamics are up to the roof right now, or you are kind of lonely. You don't have enough oxytocin. Like all of those can be seen as neurological responses. Now, the reason I think this is important and how it connects to our conversation is awareness. Because once you acknowledge that, once you are aware, then you can go into the practicality of it. You can go into continuing that road. But just as a first step is just to become aware. And you mentioned that, and that is a lot of the gift that you're giving to the world. It's not the only one, but from my perspective, that is one of the gifts that I'm bringing to our consciousness to the world is that whenever you feel odd, breathe. Understand that that illness is a signal. There is nothing wrong with you.
Right.
You are fine. You are, a great human. Like, everybody still loves you the exact same way. You should still love yourself the exact same way. But it's a signal that something is just off. Take the time to look around and discover what that is. Now,
Yes.
that's when you can kind of use an actual step-by-step process, or, over time you become, at the beginning, it's more mechanic because you have to be guided to understand how this is happening to you so that you can get from A to Z in the most efficient way. But over time, it becomes second nature, and that's kind of like I am. That's when I became so excited about this because I realized there is power in it. After it becomes second nature, you can use this framework all the time. Okay, something's odd. What's going on? What is
Right.
going on around me? And what I often find is that a lot of the routines and behaviors get out of whack with our environment. Meaning, sometimes we get stuck, and the reason I'm bringing this on is because we're talking about love. Sometimes it's about chopping the head off, like that is actual love. Sometimes we get a little too attached to, well, this works. I wake up at this time, I go to sleep at this time, I eat this, I do this. We notice it works, but when you're feeling off, that's a signal that something between your environment and your own biology is off, and it's in the form of your routine. And your routine is the glue of the two. So as the seasons change, we feel different. The energy changes. We're talking about vibration. We're talking about just practicality, like the lighting changes. Your hormones change. And if you stick to that same routine, it starts getting out of whack. It's the one actually getting you out of alignment. So making those adjustments. So there has been a lot of work in my end to understand, to become aware what are those adjustments necessary, what are the most efficient. Are we talking daylight savings time? Are we talking in the fall from the Jan to the June? Are we talking in the spring? Like there are certain times, during summer break with kids that you should look at your routine and ensure it's in alignment with your environment, which is not just the weather. It is your social dynamics. In the summer break, I just kind of went through that. The kids are sitting at school a lot. Sorry, they are not going to school, so your routine changes.
Right.
So I think that I wanted to drop that into the episode because it's a very practical way to wrap up my perspective, which is pretty much the same. It's just a little angle that I take on awareness and becoming conscious and using that to be a better person, to, be more like God and less like, like a separate being from everything that's going on around you. So that's all my 2 cents on how to use this at a practical level. And if you've been, hearing this far along, again, check out the description down below. We got Bill's contact information. We got Bill's book. So I encourage you to go ahead and check it out. And for everybody watching now, I'm going to basically allow Bill to close the episode. Bill, this is up to you. How you want to close this. This is your space. I know you're going to, you know, I can't do a better job than you at this time. Like, this has been a wonderful episode. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving me your time, your wisdom. I know I'm a better man because of this last hour that we spent together, and I know the audience is. So thank you so much. If you want to close this out, go ahead, and I will be here for any other, seasonal questions that you guys have. Drop them in the comments. I look forward to connecting.
Okay. Well, I am going to close this out. And Ruben, I would say that what you just said about being aware of the signals is very, very important. And one of the chapters in my book is actually we're energetic beings in an energetic cosmos. And recognizing those signals helps guide us through this world that we live in. So I think that's beautiful and very intelligent guidance. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me today. And I really enjoyed this. And I will end with the word namaste. And the word namaste means the divine in me honors the divine in you. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things that we can say to anybody. And so I'm going to say namaste. The divine in me honors the divine in you, and the divine in me and you honors all the people that listen to this.
Namaste, Bill, and namaste, everyone. Keep it seasonal.
Keep it seasonal.